play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Pick and roll. And a foul, offensive foul coming up. Ken Valentine's standing right there.
Izzo dying for a moving screen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Moving Screen podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn from The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart, umhoops.com. Dylan, what's up, man? You're in a funk of football and self-loathing that is, as a Philadelphian, I am impressed by.
Right now, I think the whole city of Cleveland is a bit in mourning, and a lot of expectations, a lot of disappointment. I'm glad that I moved to the suburbs, didn't have to watch downtown burn to the ground after they lost last night.
Smoldering heap.
I'm not even a Browns fan, but I bought into a little bit of the hype, watched the game, and, well...
But you are a Lions fan.
Then I turned on the Lions game, and look where we are. Here we are. So don't even have to watch the Lions game. You can tell what's going to happen in that one. How did the Eagles do yesterday?
Eagles with a comeback win. They were down 20-7 at halftime. I'm on the golf course checking the scores, just shaking my head.
Must be nice.
Just a total disgrace. The bullshit Redskins. And but lo and behold, can't keep a good man down, and Carson Wentz picked their asses apart in the second half, and the Eagles won going away. So, well, not going away. Got a little
must be nice
squirmy late, but yeah, it was nice. This is all distracting me, the fact that you also watched that Michigan football game.
Yeah, is there a better comparison for Army football than like Wisconsin basketball?
Oh, I
just
like that.
Tough to watch. One of those games where you watch and it's just, oof. Can't imagine watching a whole season of that. It must be fun.
Will be a very interesting couple months in Ann Arbor coming up, I think. And speaking of that, on that note, actually, we will let's get into the topic of today's pod. This is a Michigan-centric pod for all you guys out there, so Michigan State fans. If look away if need be, if you're one of those folks that just can't bear to listen to opposing content. But today, because we're about to be getting into all preseason content, we kind of thought it was appropriate to tie a bow on the John Beilein era at Michigan. Arguably the most successful head coach in program history. And, what was it, 11 years? 12 years? 11?
11, I believe.
I think 11. With lots of games, lots of crazy memories, and we figured we would take one full pod and kind of go back and relive the good and bad of what was an extremely interesting time for Michigan basketball. Did it span the lifetime of Hoops, Dylan?
Yes. Hoops started in 2008 or 9, so right there at the start of Beilein's first year. So, yeah.
You were like the authority of the authorities.
Been through it all. Here we go.
Awesome.
A lot of digging deep into the memory banks. If you go back through the number of games, it's quite a few.
Yeah.
They all kind of start blending together a bit but it's fun to look back, and we have some fun stuff to talk about, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting going back and rereading a bunch of pieces. And first of all, man, what a terrible writer. But it's just my opinion from this morning. It was I went into some dark places this morning going back and rereading some old content. Yikes. But before we get into this, and this will be fun, some business to tend to. If you want to support this podcast, please make sure you subscribe to The Athletic and subscribe to umhoops.com. What do you have up there? I'm sure you got all kinds of great recruiting stuff going right now.
Yeah, lots of recruiting stuff going. This week we're going to have our Big Ten Top 25 list with Inside the Hall, which is always fun to start talking about some Big Ten hoops. Everyone can tell us where we're wrong. It's good bit of preseason fun.
Yes. Check out The Athletic. We have, speaking of football, I think some of the best football coverage that you'll find anywhere with Austin Meek on Michigan, Colton Pouncey on Michigan State, Chris Burke on the Lions, and then Nick Baumgartner as a kind of floating flamethrower, touching on all subjects. So check all that out there. I think it's great what that has kind of morphed into here over the last year, and I enjoy it, and I think anyone out there would as well. I'll be on vacation for the next week, so not going to be too much hoop stuff, but I will be coming back mid-September and ripping and roaring through the preseason, and I'm getting excited for that. So subscribe to both, and while we're at it, check out my new podcast with Nick Baumgartner. It's called The Beat. It is available on iTunes, but that will only be kind of part of the podcast that will be available publicly. If you are a subscriber to The Athletic, you'll get the full episodes, and make sure that you won't miss anything on that. It's a different kind of podcast. Last week, we went down to Maumee, Ohio, and sat in a Ohio State bar with Jack Miller and crushed some beers and talked about his kind of football life at Michigan when he was recruited by Rich Rod, played for Brady Hoke, and then left the program once Jim Harbaugh got there. So, man, he had some stories, and we had a good time. So check that out if you haven't listened to it. And this week we have a Michigan State episode coming up that I think you'll all find very, very interesting. So we're recording that tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to it. So check out the pod, and that's it. You have anything to plug, Dylan, before we uncork this?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
If you like this podcast, rate, review, subscribe on iTunes, tell a friend. I think we missed that, but it's all right.
Leave a review. I like reading them. They're, they really do pick me up every once in a while when I'm feeling down.
It's good.
Okay. Yeah. How about you lead us into this thing, since you are, man, I really hadn't considered the fact that you've been there right from the beginning. You and John came hand in hand into this thing.
Maybe it's the Hoops era, not the Beilein era.
Wait,
so
can we tell the story? Well, now that John's gone, we can certainly tell the story of when John was trying to figure out who you were and what the website was. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, that was way back. I was not really covering the team formally, and it was just this Hoops entity. And for a while, they were just trying to figure out who I was, where I was. I was a student at the time, and I don't know what more of the story there is, but eventually they had to track me down, and they couldn't figure out where this Hoops was. That was covering Michigan basketball all the time. So yeah.
Well, you had recruiting information, and they were like, "Who is this guy? Where is he getting it from?" Because you didn't put your name on it, right?
My name was on it, but they didn't know who.
You didn't know who Dylan Burkhart
was. Yeah, it was just a mystery person.
But you had
early days.
You had some dirt, and they were concerned where the dirt was coming from.
Yeah, at that point, I don't think Beilein was quite as comfortable with people talking about his program all the time. Got a little more used to it as time went on, I would say.
You did. It was a very interesting evolution. Okay, so we're going to rattle through these categories, right?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of categories we want to go through, kind of all over the board. Things like best win, worst loss, craziest game, stuff like that. You just want to get into it, topic by topic?
Yeah, and I think we'll just kind of unpack his era as we work through remembering these games. It'll kind of all, I think, build upon itself. So, and just as a note, I'm only picking games that I was here for.
Yeah, so you got here in 2013-14, is that right?
Yes. It was September 2013 was when I arrived in Ann Arbor.
So you came strutting in, thinking you're going to cover a team coming off the Final Four, and life is good. That's a smart career move there.
And they went to the Elite Eight, and as Tennessee went on to fire Konzo Martin and entered the dark ages of Donnie Tillman. So yes, I made a very astute career choice by coming from Knoxville to Ann Arbor. Absolutely.
And I think
one of the few good decisions in a life full of bad choices.
Hey, they all worked out in the end. Look at you now. I think our first category really speaks to kind of the difference in the two sort of eras, I would say, of Beilein's coaching tenure, where it's pretty much split evenly, not quite from when you came in, but the year before that, right?
Right.
It was before they got to the Final Four, and then it was kind of this era after where that was a realistic expectation in a way that it really never was when Beilein was building the program up. So we're going to start with best win. And what did you go with for the best win of the Beilein era?
I went with, because it was kind of a pivot point, and I don't think anyone at all expected them to win the game. I took the 77-70 win at Wisconsin in 2014. They hadn't won at Wisconsin in forever. Bo Ryan 100% had Beilein's number, right? Like, I feel like at that point, kind of Wisconsin was maybe this, like, it was almost Beilein's, like, perfect image of himself, right? Like, of what he wanted Michigan to be. He wanted it to be Wisconsin, right?
To an extent, and also he could just never beat Wisconsin.
Right.
Even till the last season, right? Like, Wisconsin was more than any other team, the team that Michigan just could not consistently beat. And plenty of times Michigan had basically had the game won, whether it was there or in Ann Arbor against Wisconsin, and crazy shit went down.
Yeah.
And that year, when you really think about it, no one was really sure what Michigan was at that point when they went and won that game.
And they did nothing in the preseason to help them. There was McGarry was out, or was in, was out, was in, was out. And then really, actually, one of the pivot points of kind of that season and even this time, because there's that big thing of, like, once you go to a Final Four, of sustaining that. Like, it's so easy to go to a Final Four and then fall off the face of the earth again. And this season was huge for Beilein to keep the thing going, keep the momentum going. And they went out that preseason, lost at Iowa State, lost to Charlotte in Puerto Rico, got hammered at Duke, and then lost a game that they really nearly won against number 1 Arizona at home. And then it was finally that
days later, they had the press conference to say that Mitch was done.
Right. They announced that, I think the day of the Stanford game, they announced that he was not playing and was out, wasn't it?
I think it was the week leading up to it. I think they had like a press conference in Ann Arbor that week because the Stanford game was in Brooklyn.
Right.
And I remember they had some sort of, they announced it, and then they kind of took on a new identity. That Stanford game, and
they weren't waiting for him anymore.
Yeah, because that team was supposed to be the Mitch McGarry team. It wasn't supposed to be the Nick Stauskas team. Right. And at Christmas, it was still kind of. We didn't know what a Nick Stauskas team was, and then they had a really kind of easy start to the Big Ten season, where they won a couple road games, but they weren't really playing anyone great. And then that Wisconsin game just changed the whole year, I would say.
And it was a great Wisconsin team. That was the team that went on to the Final Four, I believe. And then the following year went back to the Final Four. This was Kaminsky, Decker, Ben Bruss, Gasser, like just a Nigel Hayes coming off the bench as probably a freshman, right? Bronson Koenig was a freshman. Just a great team. And Michigan at that point, it's mid-January. They hadn't really won. Their best win was against a pretty mediocre Stanford
Florida
and
State
Florida
or
State
Stanford,
teams. Yeah. And then they go out to Wisconsin, beat the Badgers, and Nick Stauskas kind of starts to turn into MVP.
Yeah, he had that step back.
And more importantly, Karis LeVert kind of started to become a dude. That was when people raised some eyebrows looking at this skinny sophomore that no one really expected from. He went and put 20 on Wisconsin on the road out of nowhere. And 2 games later, Michigan beats Michigan State
on the road.
And that's it. They're off and running to what becomes...
10 games later, they win the Big Ten by several games and just destroyed the whole league in a season that no one really expected that from.
So I think that's the biggest win for me, because I think it just turned a corner that, in the big picture of where this program went, I think a lot points back to that game.
And that's definitely on the list. I mean, I think we're getting a little cute with this when you could obviously point back to the game at the Breslin that Michigan won in 2011, which neither of us actually picked, but everyone knows about that game. I want to talk about other games that kind of stand out.
Yeah.
So I went with the Ohio State home win in February of 2012, and that was a year that Ohio State was really good. And at that point in time, Ohio State was kind of the class of the Big Ten. That team had Jared Sullinger, Buford, Deshaun Thomas, Aaron Kraft. They went on to the Final Four that year, I believe.
Were they number one coming into that game?
They were number one. It was college game day. It was the whole thing. They had destroyed Michigan in Columbus a few weeks earlier. It was the Trey Burke, Jared Sullinger, high school teammates, all that. So it had all the primetime Saturday night. And it was really the year, like, Michigan had beat Michigan State before, but they had not beat that Ohio State team, and they just really couldn't.
Right.
And that went on to kind of propel them to the Big Ten regular season championship that year. They won 6 of their last 7 games, and really that kind of got them over the hump against Ohio State in a way that they hadn't before. And I think, obviously, the Michigan State game the year before, pivotal win, but that game's been talked about to death, so we're skipping that game.
No, that's a good one. That Ohio State team went on. That was the team that lost to Kansas in the national semis.
And Michigan won that game 56-51 in a 57-possession game. And that was really how that team played. And if you look back, almost all the games that Trey Burke's freshman year Michigan played, they were playing 58, 59, 57 possessions in a Big Ten game, which just kind of speaks to how much, obviously, rule changes and stuff made games a little quicker. But Michigan was really just grinding out games that year, and they did it against an Ohio State team that was just so much more talented. And
that had
really
a
stood
big
out.
deal in the Burke transformation to being kind of the guy who the next year going into the season with like All-American stuff, right? To going and doing it to Ohio State, his home state team and all that. I'm imagining that was the narrative.
Yeah, because the narrative coming out of the game in Columbus was basically like Trey Burke got punked. They did all this, like they basically designed their whole defense around him. Michigan only scored 49 points. Obviously, they only scored 56 the next time, but they held Ohio State to 51. But either way, that was kind of a huge game for Trey just to beat Ohio State and just do it on the biggest stage that really Michigan had been on at that point, right? Like it wasn't like Michigan was a nationally relevant basketball brand at that point. And that was a huge win.
God, this is before there aren't even Ken Palm box scores up yet for that season. Yikes.
Throwbacks, man.
Way back. Why the hell did Michigan play Arkansas in the middle of January that year?
They had a home and home with them.
What they play in January?
That was another crazy game, though.
Okay.
That was that used to be a bigger thing. Michigan used to play non-conference games fairly often over their bye week. I don't know if it was because the Big Ten had fewer teams and there was more space in the schedule or what, but they played a few of those. The year before, they played, I think, I want to say UConn or something like that Kansas. They played Kansas in January in 2011.
Jesus.
So they used to always squeeze one of those games in.
That's very random. Okay. Worst loss. Let's. How about you take the first one here? It looks like you got a number of them. Oh boy,
I have a few, but I settled on. I think the Ohio game that same season where they lost the first round of the NCAA tournament, just because of that was really the only time that Michigan was clearly upset in the NCAA tournament, I would say. Mm-hmm. And it was just a bad performance. Really, that team ran out of gas, I would say. But either way, like there's other bad losses in the losses that when Michigan had 2 of their best teams and they just got trounced against a terrible Penn State team. Like those are bad losses, but that game against Ohio was the worst loss considering the stakes. I can't really think of another NCAA tournament game where Michigan was a clear favorite and just didn't win, especially the first day of an NCAA tournament weekend, right?
Yeah.
So that stands out to me. It's just the one they got wrong.
I mean, but in an alternate history, say they win that game, they win another. Say that Michigan team goes to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8 on the back of Trey Burke playing. Is he there for his sophomore year?
I mean, he almost wasn't there for his
That's what I mean.
sophomore year to begin with, so probably not.
I imagine it helping that his freshman year ended with a total dud, huh?
I mean, it was certainly a
getting owned by DJ Cooper.
DJ Cooper, man. And they had that game was just, and that was one of those weird NCAA tournament games where it was super late. And it was in a hockey arena, I remember, in Nashville, and it was just kind of off from the start. I mean, we've been to other NCAA tournament games that are just kind of off from the start, like that Montana game in Wichita, sort of the same feel. And then all of a sudden, DJ Cooper woke up, and Michigan just never did. And that was that.
Last game at Ohio for Mr. John Groch.
Yeah, that was the peak of his career. No, it wasn't the last game. They went to the Sweet 16.
Oh, well, right. But the final season, this was his. It's how he got the Illinois job and ended up being the greatest gift Michigan could get, because that ended up resulting in Karis LeVert.
Yeah, if they win that game, Karis LeVert is all MAC 3-time player who never comes to Michigan either. That's an even bigger what if than Trey Burke.
Absolutely. Man, that's wild. Okay.
Beilein was playing the long game there.
My worst loss is early winter 2014. New Jersey Institute of Technology comes to Ann Arbor, and one of the most stunning games I've ever seen. That was just a wild day, man. That was the first of the two historically bad
losses. Could you
losses.
argue that the Eastern loss was worse?
No. Eastern Michigan is a long-established Division I program from a conference. People have heard of EMU.
Michigan scored 42 points in 60 possessions against Eastern.
Dude, I don't care what the stats say. NJIT is NJIT. They didn't even have a conference. Like, people have to remember. So NJIT came in. It was a recently transitioned D1 program. Jim Ingles is the coach, a guy I know from back when I was in Philly, and that guy wrote a big story on him from a magazine piece because it was basically starting to turn a D1 program out of nothing. And they started out, they weren't in a conference, and then they joined the Great West Conference. Do you remember that thing? It was a bunch of it was kind of an island of misfit toys of teams that were trying to transition to D1. So it was Chicago State, Houston Baptist, South Dakota, Utah Valley, Texas Pan American, North Dakota, and NJIT. That was the league. Then that thing fell apart. It only lasted 4 years. And NJIT was an independent when it came to into the 2014-15 season, and won at Michigan. I remember talking to Engels before the game, and he's looking around the arena. He's just like, "Oh, this is gonna be bad." Like, anytime they played a major school, they got their fucking asses kicked by Georgetown and Virginia and someone else in his time there, and he thought they were going to lose by 100 at Michigan, and then they ended up winning the game.
Here's my argument. Teams shoot 65%. They shot 65% from three in that game.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a random thing that happens, and upsets like that happen all over the place. To come back the next game, knowing that you just lost to NJIT, and to score 40 points against Eastern Michigan at home, that has to be worse. I don't know how you can say that. Maybe the NJIT loss was more surprising, but the Eastern loss was more pathetic, I would say.
The NJIT loss was historic. Michigan has lost to EMU before. It wasn't even the first time that the program lost to them. Nobody lost to NJIT. Nobody.
All right. I just think it's sort of like you're caught up in the hype around the day, but the actual performance was far worse against Eastern Michigan.
Well, you can go back and find worse performances even than the EMU game, I imagine.
Can you?
But after no loss, has the coach ever sat at the press conference and said, "I hope this win can get us into the America East or the NEC"? And that's what Jim Ingles said that day. That was a good NJIT team, though. Remember Damon Lynn?
Yeah.
He was good.
They ended up being – it was a top 200 KenPom team. That happens.
He went to
ranked
the G
there
League.
at the time.
They lost to Northern Arizona in the CIT finals. It was actually a big win for Engels. He won 20 games each of his last 2 years, and then he went to Columbia, where he still is. I think he's going into his fourth year there. And NJIT is still on the uptick, man. They're in a league.
Weren't you like in the locker room with them after the game?
Yeah.
Giving them hugs and stuff?
I don't know about all that. But so since then, NJIT is in the Atlantic Sun now. Brian Kennedy is the head coach. He was
they're
a
program on the rise.
He was an assistant on that team. He's actually a big name. You know Hoop Group? You know the Hoop Group, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was the former director of the Hoop Group back in the day. His uncle, I think. Yeah, his uncle is Pat Kennedy, the old Towson, Florida State DePaul coach.
We've gone way too deep into
What are you
the
talking about?
NJIT program trajectory here. For the record, worst offensive games in the Beilein era: Texas Tech, Eastern Michigan.
Oh, wow, that is a great stat. That shows how horrific that Texas Tech game was. Holy shit.
It does. It's a little more acceptable to do it against the best defense of the Beilein era, probably, but still.
Fair.
So,
all right.
those are
That's
the worst losses.
You made a good argument for EMU. I'll give you that.
Most entertaining game. We'll kick it to you for this one first.
Okay, I'm going to the 2017-18 season, the 92-88 loss at Purdue. One of the best games I've ever seen in person. Here's some nuggets I pulled out from my game story that night. So, to start the second half, Michigan made 14 of 18 shots, and Purdue made 14 of 17 shots. At one point, they traded 16 straight made baskets and had 13 lead changes. Let's see. Michigan became the second team in college basketball in like a 10-year span to lose a game when shooting 60% from the field and making 13 three-pointers. Michigan actually probably could have won the game, but that was when Jerron Simmons came in. This was totally on Beilein. He made a terrible substitution, put in Jerron for like 3 possessions. He tried to just steal 3 possessions, and Simmons committed 2 turnovers, and then Muhammad missed 2 free throws, and it was a game where basically you couldn't
14-2 run?
Yeah, it was like who would blink first, basically, and Michigan blinked, and then Purdue ran away and won by 4. They made it close again late, but that game was awesome.
The Ken Palm of it, and they gave up a 12-2 run in the first half and a 14-2 run in the second half, basically at the exact same place in each half, kind of that 10 to 5 minute range, and still only lost by 4. So they were basically perfect in the rest of the game, but
it was an incredible game.
Missed 3 shots and 3 empty possessions in a row, and that was that.
That Purdue team was really, really good. I remember Beilein. He's getting onto the bus after it. We're in like the back bowels at Mackey, and he turned and he kind of had like that like PTSD expression, like, you know, just big wide eyed. He's just like, man, he's like, who's going to stop that? You know, because I mean Purdue was just a machine at that point. That's when they looked like 100% Final Four team. They'd won like 13 straight games or something. They were just mowing over everyone, and then kind of fizzled out at the end. Should have been a Final Four team.
That was the Purdue team that someone got hurt, right? Haas got hurt in the tournament.
Yeah.
So I'm going with another kind of shootout game, Michigan-Oklahoma State in the 2017 NCAA tournament. I think it was probably the best offensive game I've certainly ever seen in person. It was just exchanging baskets. I'm not really sure either team was dead set on stopping the other one. Those were 2 teams that were all about outscoring the other team at that point.
Yes.
But that was just kind of the peak of Derek Walton. Jawan Evans was just getting his on the other side, and both teams shot over 40% from 3. Michigan shot 55% on 29 threes, which is just ridiculous.
They only committed 4 turnovers. They made 16 threes and committed 4 turnovers and still only won by 2. That's how good that game was.
By 1.
By 1, sorry.
6% turnover rate, 56 3-point shooting percentage, 1.42 points per possession. And just, again, to see that kind of game in the NCAA tournament where usually you see teams play kind of uptight or this or that, they were just letting it fly, both teams, and that was probably the most exciting NCAA tournament game I've been at.
Yeah, the final 15-30 of regulation, Michigan made 11 of 13 threes. included in that stretch, that was that great moment when Duncan hit that transition three, and like the bench was like spilling onto the floor because at this point like they couldn't miss a shot, and then shot clock winding down. 2 possessions later was when Walton hit like that 30-footer and smiled at the Oklahoma State bench. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And like Underwood almost like got a folding chair and took it to him like a wrestler. He was losing his shit.
That was really, I think, the best. That was right when Derek Walton was just at the. I don't know if Derek Walton could play basketball for another 100 years, and he'll never play basketball like he did over that 3-week span, really.
But if we're talking, you're 100%. But if we're talking Beilein, this is the Beilein pod. This was the key Beilein moment in this game. Do you remember? He goes out of character in the first half because Oklahoma State started running away a little bit. They got the lead out to like 7 or 8 or something, and he had Mo on the bench with 2 fouls, and he put him back in. So goes out of character on the auto bench, puts Mo back in. He got like a layup on the first possession he was out there. Just the first touch he got, he put in the basket. They went on a little run, and then Zach hit a 3. Zach Irvin hit a 3. That was a 10-2 run and put them up 28-27 after they were trailing early. Changed the game.
Yeah, I do vaguely remember that. Mo only ended up playing 14 minutes, though. That was really, they realized they just had to play DJ at the 5 all the time at that point because they were playing a team that spread you out as much as Michigan liked to spread people out. And that DJ played 40, Irvin played 40, Walton played 39, Muhammad played 38. And if you remember, actually, when Michigan, I think, played Illinois this year, Underwood brought up this game talking about how much Xavier Simpson had grown. And he was like, they tried to play him in that game and he couldn't even play. And that's literally what happened. He went on for 2 minutes and he was like, he shouldn't even played in that game. And now he's the best point guard in the Big Ten.
That's right. That's a great point.
Because Simpson went out there for 2 minutes and just was completely overwhelmed and out of place. And that was not a deep Michigan team by any stretch. And now Simpson is what he is, which is kind of, things haven't gone great for Brad Underwood since then either.
It's really a shame that Oklahoma State team ran into that Michigan team because that Oklahoma State team could have done some damage. They were good.
Yeah, they had, I think, the best offense in the country that year.
Is that right?
Which is pretty insane for a team that went 20-11, 9-9. Defense was not big into the.
Well, at one point they were 0-6 in the Big 12.
Yep.
And then he switched to zone defense or something, right?
About as good as it gets for an 8-9 game. I think usually you think, or was that a 7-10 game? 7-10. I
don't remember.
But usually you think about those games as like kind of slugfest between two teams that don't really deserve to be in the NCAA tournament. Right. That was great because they both had played their way in, I would say, to an extent.
Yeah, they were both white hot going into that game. We're going to talk more, I'm sure, about that March because that was crazy, March 2017. But just as I did go back and reread all the Oklahoma State thing. I forgot how amazing of a game that was because that was the time, because of the plane crash and everything going just completely sideways. Like anyone covering the team, it was just a complete shit show. No one was sleeping. It kind of turned into a total whirlwind that was very unexpected because of the way that season was going.
Yeah, and those when the Big Ten tournament rolls into Sunday and then you're on a Thursday in some other city when the NCAA tournament's starting, it's quite a quick turnaround when it starts heating up like that.
Right. This was the team that on March 1st lost at Northwestern, and it was like, all right, well, this team is going nowhere. This thing's done. And then went and had one of the all-time offensive performances against Nebraska 4 days later. That was a weird team, but we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure.
That kind of leads into
your weirdest day.
Our next one here. Weirdest game, weirdest day. I think we have weirdest game first, craziest day next.
Oh boy, you and the adjectives. All right, go ahead.
So I wanted to get into the Savannah State game for this one because that was probably the most wild single game that I can remember, and it's a game that no one really wants to think about or remember at all in a year where there's a lot of other games that kind of went on to define Beilein's era, especially early on, right? So this was the year they beat UCLA at the Garden. This was the year they beat Duke at home. They made the NCAA tournament for the first time. They won that road game at Minnesota with the Kame Los Barcos. And it was all those things. That's all anyone thinks about in that season. Between those Duke and UCLA games, they had to come back from 20 points down at halftime against Savannah State to win in overtime on a buzzer beater. This is a game where Zach Novak stole the ball, and as the buzzer went off, missed the dunk that would have won the game.
Oh my God.
Go to overtime. So they come all the way back from 20 points down. I have some stats here. So it was 39-19 at the half. Savannah State had an 83% effective field goal percentage in the first half. This was a terrible team. They were 312th in Ken Pom. So it was just complete disaster. They go in, and they start coming back. They come all the way back. Savannah State has the ball. Game is tied. Like 5 seconds left. Sideline out of bounds. Zach Novak steals it all alone, doesn't lay it up, tries to throw down a dunk. And this is his freshman year, I think, right? So we're still getting to know who Zach Novak is, this and that. Just bricks the dunk. So everyone is just like, what is going on? We're going to overtime here. Overtime goes back and forth. Neither team really pulls away, and it ends up with Deshaun Sims kind of hitting a running buzzer beater on the baseline to win the game. And it's just one of the craziest games I can remember against just a terrible team. And if they lose that game, they don't make the NCAA tournament. They probably don't beat Duke a week later. It was just one of those moments in history where you don't really know how any of this would have ended up if not for that crazy-ass game.
Here's Zach Novak's quote on the missed dunk. I saw Manny out ahead. I was looking to pass it to him, but I saw the clock and went to the hoop strong. It was just instinct. It just didn't fall for me. If we lost the game, it would have been worse, but we came back to win, and that makes it easier to learn from. Here's a good Beilein quote on what he said at halftime. So they were down what at halftime?
39-19.
Holy shit. All right. This was his quote on what he said at halftime. You try to think about what you need to do. We were clearly rattled at halftime, and we didn't need a coach that was going to go in there and rattle them some more. It wasn't as if they weren't trying. They just got rattled. So we said, I don't know if Michigan has ever come back from 20 down at halftime, but if not, let's be the first one. Wow, I'm sad I missed this one.
I mean, most people were excited about Michigan basketball at the time. They had won that UCLA game, but that was the year that ended up getting them in the NCAA tournament for the first time in forever, which is just crazy to think back and how it all came together.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, so this is weirdest game category, right?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going Michigan, Illinois. We're going back to 2017. I said we were going to talk about it more. We're going back to 2017. This is now the Big Ten tournament. Michigan, Illinois in what was supposed to be a noon game. So 24 hours beforehand, the plane went off the runway at Willow Run, and like this whole thing was just. I mean, there's a 30 for 30 to be made, or all the oral histories I'm sure will be made in 10 years, the 10-year anniversary, 15-year anniversary, 20-year anniversary. That was just a crazy morning. If you remember, they voted the day before on whether they were even going to play the game or not. Meanwhile, the Big Ten is frantically trying to figure out what the hell to do. Whether they were going to reschedule the game or move the game or do anything to accommodate Michigan. They obviously couldn't just get back on a plane that Wednesday and get out there. So they end up, Michigan votes that they're going to play the game. Fun fact from that, in the team meeting, Derek Walton, who was the unquestioned leader of that team, didn't talk in the team meeting because he was pretty much shook and he was going to vote no, that they shouldn't play the game. He had stitches in his thigh at that point. The team votes to play. They end up taking off from Detroit, DTW, at 7:30 the following morning. Everyone gripping their chairs, I'm sure, through takeoff. And the thing that sticks out to me the most was they get there that morning. Like, the Big Ten is trying to quarantine the media to keep us away from Michigan entering the arena. Do you remember that?
I remember being locked in a closet, yeah. It was crazy that there was so much uncertainty as to whether a game was going to actually be played there when it was not very far away, right? And no one knew where Michigan was. I think they flew into the wrong airport. Is that right? They flew into the airport that was
remember.
further away. So
Okay.
then there was like a delay with the getting there because it was Washington, D.C. on a morning.
On a Thursday morning, which is an
yeah.
absolute nightmare, right?
And-
So they get there that morning, and like it is just complete chaos. Everyone trying to figure out what the hell's going on. This is the first time we actually, other than some people who were able to like text with guys and stuff like that and kind of get bits and pieces of information. This is our first actual chance to kind of get in front of people and talk. And I just remember like John Sanderson looking at me and being like, dude, that was absolutely crazy. I can't believe what's going on at that. And the thing that stuck out, I still remember him saying when I asked him like how much did you skid? Like, we only saw the pictures of the plane on its belly. And Sanderson, his quote was, "It felt like forever." And that was them just kind of sliding, waiting to figure out when the plane was actually going to stop. And I see Matt Shepard, and he's just like, "This is crazy, blah, blah, blah." And he's just rattling off stuff. He's telling me about Mark Donnell and John Teskey taking the doors off the plane and the chutes unfolding and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then the team comes out, and the famous line of Nick Baumgartner, they come out in their pajamas and went out, made 12 of their first 18 shots, blew Illinois out of the gym. Jim Groch just, I think he left at halftime. Actually, I don't remember seeing him in the second half, but one of the all-time performances, just ran them out of the gym, and it was the perfect example, I thought, in terms of when we discussing Beilein, of a team that knew how to play its game on a different level than the other team, because they came out basically without scouting the game. Like, they didn't really do any prep. They just rolled the ball out. Everyone went and played with their instincts, and they just destroyed another Big Ten team.
To be fair, they prepped for Illinois the whole week. They knew they were going to play them.
Well, yeah, they played them, but I'm talking about the 36 hours before the game. They did not.
I know.
There was zero basketball conversation.
I remember people after the game talking about kind of like, it was nice we didn't have to like over prepare, because in a lot of ways I feel like Beilein could over prepare for some of those games, and I think they kind of felt a little bit of freedom from that, if I remember right.
That's fair.
But yeah, that's going to be all time in terms of just kind of that visual of them playing in their practice jerseys, just drubbing Illinois. And imagine if that's how your season ended. Oh no, I guess they made the NIT that year. But that was the Illinois team that needed to win to make the NCAA tournament.
Yes. Yeah, it was not a small game for Illinois.
Did not put up a fight. And then obviously Michigan goes on and just decided they're going to start winning Big Ten tournaments.
Yeah, Michigan went 21 for 31 on twos in that game, made 9 threes. The first half was just, they ran them out. It was 24-11 after 10 minutes. It's a game that will live on for a long time.
See, I think that should have been a nominee for the next thing. I think you messed up the categories here.
Maybe.
But the craziest day is what I had next.
Okay.
Sorry if my categories don't suit you here, but
maybe a reach, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Either way, so I'm going with the last day of the 2012 season, just because it was such a circus and so unlikely. Michigan had played its way into the Big Ten title consideration, but had lost on senior day at home to Purdue by 14 points, which basically was supposed to put an end in those chances. They were a game out, and they still had to go to Illinois and to Penn State. But that Sunday, the situation was, if you don't remember, Michigan State and Ohio State were playing that night at the Breslin Center, and Michigan was playing at Penn State at noon. If Michigan State were to win that game, they would win the Big Ten title outright. If Ohio State wins, they would earn a share of it, but if Michigan would win, they would earn a three-way share, right? So Michigan State had a game in hand, basically, and everything had to fall just right to have any chance to share it. Michigan obviously takes care of business at State College, drove out there 6 hours across like a snowy Pennsylvania, just a lovely time to watch a game in front of about 500 people, right? Like it was just like the lamest game ever. And they're like, yeah, they get on a plane, head home. I'm driving back, and this Michigan State-Ohio State game ended up being just one of the craziest games. And Buford ends up hitting a game-winning shot basically at the buzzer, if I remember correctly, to win at the Breslin, which gave Michigan their first Big Ten championship under Beilein. And it was just kind of a wild day as far as coordinating, figuring out where everything was, and just everything coming together in that way. It was just felt lucky at the time, obviously. Like, that Michigan State team was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just, I would say, the craziest day and really one of the craziest seasons for Michigan, especially in the regular season.
And Penn State went on a 10-0 run late in that game. I imagine Michigan was, or was it ever really a game?
I don't remember it being much of a game.
That was a miserable Penn State team. That was Pat Chambers' first year. They finished 4-14 in the league.
It's just one of those games where, yeah, they did go on a 13-0 run, yeah. It's just, you look at it and a game at Penn State, and, like, obviously Michigan had a lot to play for, but they didn't really, like, I don't know that they really thought they had a chance to win the Big Ten that day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
Michigan State was favored. Michigan State was at home. Everyone just thought, oh, Michigan State's going to win, and just how boring and sleepy that game in State College was compared to, like, what took place that night just kind of always stood out to me.
And was that kind of the beginning of the end of Ohio State's run? Or did they have a couple more years?
That Thad Matta team was the best. Like, yeah, that was the end. Essentially, the next year they made the Elite Eight. So
right, and then then came the drop off a little bit. Yeah.
Once Solinger, I guess the next team made the Elite Eight with Deshaun Thomas. Man, talk about a blast from the past. one of the ultimate bucket getters without any defense. A legend before his time.
Okay, is that all you have on that day?
Yeah. What's your craziest day?
My craziest day was what year was this? Was this 14?
2014-15 season, yeah. So it would be
14-15 season. This was Michigan hosting Syracuse in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and it also happened to be the day that Michigan. I'm trying to remember if this was the press conference day or the day that it became official that he got the job. Do you remember that? I think this was the press conference day.
I think it was the press conference day, and I think he was there. Right? Isn't that what?
Yeah. So that earlier that day was the Harbaugh intro press conference, which was a legendary shit show. People put their faces pressed against the glass outside the that little room, whatever that's in between Michigan Stadium and Chrysler. Just gawking in the windows. There was like packed house, just total chaos. Everyone's trying to write all these football columns, and meanwhile, Michigan has a pretty big game that night against Syracuse. Rematch of that NCAA tournament game, right? From 2 years beforehand?
2 years ago, yeah.
So, it ended up being a very mediocre Syracuse team and a downright bad Michigan team. But that day, December 2nd, it was still a pretty important game.
Yeah, people thought Michigan was going to be good at that point. Still.
Yeah, that was they had gone to New York and beat Oregon in a pretty nice game with chants of Ricky Doyle echoing through
that's another blast from
through
the past.
Barclays Center, and then lost to Villanova in the game when DJ Wilson busted his leg and he was gone for the year. But the Syracuse game seemed to be a big night, and there was so much going on that day, and Harbaugh shows up. He's sitting courtside, so now it's just people are just completely losing their minds. The game just was such an afterthought. It was hilarious.
Wasn't Harbaugh at the Illinois game, man? I swear it was the Illinois game he was at, not the Syracuse game.
Okay. So when there was the press conference that day?
I don't know.
Shit.
I'm just fact-checking you here.
It was the Illinois game when he came out waving.
You're getting your orange mixed up.
What was the Syracuse game?
Yeah, he was hired on December 16th, 2014. He wasn't even hired yet on the December 2nd game against Syracuse. You're thinking of the Illinois game, which would have been his introductory press conference.
All right.
And it was like an overtime win. That's what you're thinking of. You got the game wrong.
Do we leave this in or edit it out?
We're leaving this in to see that you're drawing up some fake narratives over here.
Oh, what was the Syracuse game? No, there was something with the Syracuse game.
All right, well, we'll get back to that at the end of the podcast.
You talk about the next one. I'm finding out what the hell I'm thinking of.
All right, our next one is going to be the best road environment that we were at to watch. Easy one. The loudest college basketball game I've ever been at, and that would be Michigan at Indiana, February 2013. I believe they were 1-2 or 1-3 in the country at that point. Assembly Hall was just ready to explode. That was a late Saturday night game, and I always remember Victor Oladipo missing this dunk that just would have brought the roof off of that place. But really, those two teams were great all year, and Michigan came out just completely overwhelmed by the atmosphere at the start of that game. I just remember Mitch McGary running around just kind of lost in space. They were down 28-13 early, but they did kind of battle back a bit. But either way, that was just never seen an environment quite like that, and still haven't. I mean, just insane how loud Assembly Hall was.
It was the day Hoke was fired. That's what it was. Hoke gets fired. We were all in the parking lot at Schembechler Hall all day, waiting for white smoke to rise from the building. They fire Hoke. Everyone's losing it. Go to Chrysler that night, and Michigan beat Syracuse on the back of Spike Albrecht, Cam Chapman, Ricky Doyle.
That makes more sense.
There it is.
This is a very...
I combined the two. You ever hear about flashbulb memories?
Yeah, this is it.
That was a flashbulb memory. For anyone who has no idea what the hell I'm talking about, find Malcolm Gladwell's podcast on flashbulb memories from revisionist history. It's really interesting. But
the Illinois game was his
yes.
intro presser too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, sorry about that. How many people were screaming at their... at their radios in their cars as I was sitting there telling the story of when Harbaugh was introduced on the day of the Syracuse game. Oh, well. Sorry, folks. All right.
You were on that beat. You should know that better than me.
I don't remember anything.
All right. Your best road environment.
That would have been Iowa State in 2013. Okay. Unbelievable.
Court rush game, right?
Court rush game, Hilton Coliseum. One of the most underrated venues in the country, 15,000 people. I remember it was cold as shit and snow on the ground, and I get to Hilton like 3 hours before tip-off, and there is a line of students wrapped around the entire building. And I had been told about Hilton and that the people were crazy and that Ames is wild, and it was like a big Johnny Orr game because he basically helped get the game arranged. He was there to be honored. That's the guy who created the mantra of Hilton Magic, and the place was just like they opened the doors and the students filled both end zones. It was like an hour and a half before tip-off, and I think Michigan had already lost the game at that point. The place was just on fire. Michigan was number 7 in the country. McGary played that game, if you remember. Yeah. That was he was a game time decision, and he went through. We got there. That's why we got there so early. Was because it was like, would McGary play or not, and we wanted to see if he was like going to come out for warm ups and all that stuff and blah blah blah.
Oh God, gives me flashbacks to Karis LeVert.
That's right.
Just sitting on a court looking for people.
McGary played 22 minutes that game, 9 points, 6 rebounds. That was when I remember Beilein's quote when he was like, "What are we going to do?" Let me pull this. I have it exactly here. This is interesting in hindsight if you want to do some revisionist history. Beilein said, "What we were just like, what are we going to do? Wait until it's all perfect and put him back in there? Let's just put him in the game and let's see where it goes." I think in hindsight, Michigan probably would have been better served just sitting out McGarry till basically the middle of the year, but that did not happen.
Crazy that Jordan Morgan played 4 minutes in that game.
Wow.
He was basically left for spare parts at that point and ended up being really the guy down the stretch at the 5 for that team.
That's a great point.
He had a great NCAA tournament that year.
Michigan was up 5 with 8 left in the game. And then Iowa State just blew their doors off down the stretch, went on a 10-0 run. Naz Long, remember him? He was pretty damn
Monte
good.
Morris, that team was
Morris.
awesome.
Yeah, they were sick.
Monte Morris was an all-time favorite for me. Iowa State under Hoiberg was awesome. We gonna get that from Nebraska, Hoiberg? Be pretty cool. Did you get trampled at all when they rushed the court? Didn't someone break their leg at?
Yeah, it was like an elderly person or something.
Or a reporter at Iowa State.
So it was a reporter. That's right.
Were you safe in the court rush?
Yeah. I don't know if I think I just leaned down and covered my laptop. That's my move. Yeah, it was total chaos. So underrated. I mean, you could go we've covered a couple games at Duke and stuff like that, and that place is obviously crazy. And Michigan State is always what it is. I was trying to kind of come up with one that people might have not remembered. What
other games have you been at where Michigan lost and they stormed the court?
A lot.
There was a couple this year, right?
Yeah. Well, there was the Wisconsin game this year.
Yeah, which is bizarre.
Yeah. There was the Iowa game last year.
Yeah.
I wasn't at the Penn State game, but they rushed that night, didn't they? With the count.
How many people have to rush the court for it to count as a court rush? That's my question. Yeah, so I guess all three losses before the Michigan State losses were court rushes last year. Is that right?
Yeah. The 2017 Northwestern game was a court rush.
What?
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all.
When they lost at Northwestern on the buzzer beater.
Was that the Pardon one?
The buzzer beater.
Pardon one that made the tournament for them?
Yeah. That place was wild. I don't know if that made it on the list here, but that was a crazy freaking night. One of the all-time defensive gaffes in Beilein history. The breakdown on that.
I don't know if that's the worst.
I didn't say it's the worst. I said one of the all-time.
There are some all-time last shot. We can get into some of those a little later. I wanted to talk about those, but I did want to just talk about Northwestern and how it seemed like some of the weirdest Michigan games under Beilein always were against Northwestern or at Northwestern. I looked up a stat. It wasn't quite as impressive as I hoped, but Michigan played 25 overtimes under Beilein. 5 of them were against Northwestern.
Wow, that's a great stat.
I was hoping it'd be higher, but either way, those games were just always chaos, which was just weird shit happening all the time. Okay. I don't know why that was. Michigan was usually a better team. It just always seemed to go that way. Just one I wanted to throw out there. It doesn't really fit in the category.
I like that.
All right. So this was, I don't know. You're gonna make fun of my adjectives again, but I have weirdest road environment, which is I really wanted to talk about how some of these preseason tournaments that Michigan has played in over the years have just been bizarre. Whether it was organized chaos like Puerto Rico, where you're just going all over the place and no one really knows what's going on. I think they had a MC at the games. There was people dancing in all sorts of costumes. It was just weird.
Every time out was a party. The place was dead for game action, and then every time out there'd be 40 people on the court dancing. The AC was out of control.
It was so cold.
It was 95 degrees outside, and it was 52 in the arena.
And then I just threw out Atlanta's just weird to see a game in a ballroom like that. And
the Mohegan Sun is the worst. The
Mohegan Sun is hands down the worst, though. And it's just what are we doing here in this smoke-filled casino but they hustle through all sorts of games. There's just a weird environment there for sure, and that's probably the most bizarre. I think way back Michigan played in one that was in Atlantic City, but I didn't cover that one.
Oh, Boardwalk Hall,
was another casino ballroom. Yeah.
Yeah, Boardwalk Hall is connected to a casino. It's not a casino in and of itself, but Boardwalk Hall is a bizarre building. I've covered a couple of A10 tournaments there. And I was also at a St. Joe's Tulsa game in Atlantic City. Man, this is going way back to like 97, maybe. Yeah, that's a very strange place. I'm trying to think if there's...
Once upon a time.
The Barclays and the Madison Square Garden ones were always awesome.
Once upon a time, Michigan lost to Syracuse and UTEP in back-to-back games at Boardwalk Hall in the 2010-11 season.
But you'll remember the Atlantis moment was the Mo Wagner breakout happened in Atlantis.
Yeah. And we were, I think, the only ones that watched it. That game was at about 9:30 p.m. on a Friday before the Ohio State game on True TV, or no, what's it called? Access TV. And Mo went and dropped, 19 points in a 102-47 win over Charlotte.
And he made a couple threes. There was a couple spin moves there where we were like, "Oh man, look at this guy. Who could he be?" Yeah. And then he didn't play for the next 2 months.
Beilein promptly put him on the bench for the next 3 months. Then decided to pull him out again in the final week of the season.
All right, and I don't remember much about this game.
The UCLA game?
When we were in Puerto Rico, the Florida State overtime game. How'd they win that?
They came all the way. It was a crazy game. They came all the way back, and it was just they were down. I think huge.
Well, they outscored them 23-14 in the final 10 minutes of the game.
Yeah, and it was one of the craziest comebacks I can remember. And that was, I think, probably the best game that Mitch played that year. It was all of a sudden Mitch started going crazy, leading fast breaks.
That's right. Came off the bench.
Was hitting threes, and they came all the way back and won that game, and then turned around the next morning and just got lost to Charlotte in the biggest trash heap of a game that I can remember.
I think that is the number 2 most hungover I've been to cover a Michigan game in my tenure here.
Might be the most hungover performance by Michigan in your tenure here. Because that was a bad Charlotte team.
That was a really bad Charlotte team.
Michigan just completely stunk it up that next day. But
who was the coach of that Charlotte team? There's a question.
No, it was
Alan Major. Jesus.
Alan Major, yeah.
Former Ohio State assistant, right?
Sure.
I don't know. I might be making that up. Okay, let's move on. This is weirdest road environment, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so you had the preseason tournaments. I'm going with a game that we both remember well. We were out there in Hollywood. That game at UCLA in 2016. Michigan, at that point, UCLA was arguably the best team in America. They just beat Kentucky. They were ranked number 2. Lonzo Ball and TJ Leaf and all those guys. That squad was stacked with NBA guys. Sports Illustrated just did a big story on the rebirth of UCLA basketball back to the Wooden era, blah, blah, blah. So, that's kind of the quality of team that Michigan's getting ready to play. And then you go into Pauley Pavilion and no one gave a shit. And it was an amazing game.
It was an amazing game.
Maybe the best half of basketball I've ever seen in my life, that first half. And there was it was half full, wasn't it, if I remember correctly? Or 3/4 full? Yeah, no energy.
Dead.
The student section had 300 people in it. It was just awful.
I really enjoyed the indoor-outdoor vibe of the stadium, though, with the food trucks.
That's right.
You don't get that in the Big Ten.
And Michigan could have won that game, but UCLA made 20 of 27 second-half shots, which is that's kind of a deal breaker. But if you remember the 2 reasons Michigan pissed it away a little bit? It was the end of the first half.
UCLA never missed a shot. That's what I remember.
They gave up that 9-2 run in the last minute and a half of the first half, and Lonzo hit the walk-off 3 that was just
from 30 feet, right?
Yeah, just a kick right in the balls right before halftime. And then in the second half, Michigan clawed back to its absolute credit. They played great. And then Mark Donnell and DJ Wilson just whiffed on a defensive rebound off a missed free throw. UCLA gets a put back and then ran him out of the gym in the last couple of minutes.
Sort of a bit of foreshadowing there with
That's
the
right.
whiffed defensive rebound.
That's right. And
Cost them the season.
But the real memory of that trip, do you remember? Estrella is the restaurant we went to before the game.
Oh, yes. The
Rolling Stone.
You want to explain it? You wanted this so bad.
I saw this restaurant on one of the cooking networks or something, and they had this a bacon wrapped avocado with a soft boiled egg in the middle, and it looked amazing. So we went. It was you, me, Mark Snyder, and James Hawkins, right?
Sounds right.
We went and found this restaurant in was it West Hollywood maybe?
Yes, it was in West Hollywood, and you had been talking about this egg since August of that year. The moment it was on the schedule, you were like, this is the only reason we have to go to this game. It's going to be so good. And it was quite fantastic. I'll give you that. It lived up to the
four
hype.
of us ordered the same thing. Just four grown men sat down and ordered the same thing at a pretty nice restaurant. And it was amazing.
Like it was normal procedure for people to order. Like it seemed quite popular,
super
at
famous.
least for
Yeah.
that super famous. I don't know. I wouldn't go that far. It was known.
Whatever. Jesus. Though I remember the best part was the night before. You and I are out trying to find a normal place to drink, and we go into the first bar we were in. Right, it was like an $18 neat pour of a Jameson. I'm gonna get a Jameson neat, and it was like $23 or something. We're in this. We are by far the ugliest people in this.
We were in
this bar.
anything around the Beverly Hills Marriott.
Yes.
They quickly told us to get out of that town and go to. We went somewhere else. I don't even remember.
I think we were back in West Hollywood that night too. That second bar was cool as shit though. The place that we shut down.
Yes, it was a much improved atmosphere compared to wherever we started.
Very, very cool. I wish I remember
Good
the name
audible.
of that bar. Okay, moving on.
Lowest
Next category is biggest upset.
No, you skipped lowest points.
Oh, lowest point. Okay, lowest points. This is going to be a long goddamn. This is going to
How long have
be
we
2
been
hours.
going? We need to accelerate here a little bit.
This is going to be a 2 hour. This is going to be the first 2 hour podcast in the history of the moving screen.
Oh,
All right,
it's not
lowest
2
points. You go first.
So I had two, and I think they both kind of stand out. I just want to go back to an older one again because you're going to bring more newer stuff to the table, I think.
Yeah.
I think just the end of that 2010 season, and that was where Michigan kind of entered the year with all sorts of expectations. Manny Harris, Deshaun Sims were back, and they just really tanked the whole year. Then in the Big Ten tournament, they play their best game of the year, think they're going to beat Ohio State on Friday in the Big Ten tournament, maybe this is going to be something. Instead, Evan Turner hits the buzzer beater, just the worst way to end an already frustrating season. From there, Manny goes pro, Deshaun graduates, you're coming back with a team that has Zach Novak, Stu Douglas, and Darius Morris, and basically you're hitting reset right when you think that you kind of had some momentum going. That stands out to me as sort of the first low point that Michigan had to sort of bounce back from under Beilein, where they were like, okay, we have to start from square one again here. And that was kind of a big transition point, I would say, in building up Michigan into what came next.
That team lost to Northwestern twice and Penn State once.
Team lost a lot of games.
Wow.
The team was dysfunctional in many ways.
All right. Do you have any other low points?
No, we'll just stick with that. We got to accelerate the pace here a little bit.
I'm going back to the 2014-15 season when Michigan was already kind of down and out. It was clear that Levert wasn't coming back. Derek Walton was injured. He had that weird toe injury or whatever was going on with him. They were on a 5-game losing streak, and then here comes Michigan State walking into Chrysler. That was the Trice Brandon Dawson team, and jumped out to a 21-8 lead. It was 38-23 at halftime. Just a brutal performance by Michigan. It was basically the scraps of what was a team that kind of started the year with some anticipation. The starting lineup that night was Spike Albrecht. No disrespect, Spike, if you're out there. But the starting lineup that night was Spike Albrecht, Zach Irvin, Aubrey Dawkins, Muhammad, and Ricky Doyle. So that is Zach Irvin playing the 4 in that game. against a Michigan State team that would end the year in the Final Four. Not ideal. Michigan got run, and I just remember I call it the low point because at that point, like, it was not clear whether Michigan was going to bounce back. Like, it seemed like everything was lost from the momentum of what the program was, from the national championship game appearance to the Elite Eight, and now this. It was 5 minutes left in the game. Chrysler's empty except for like 2,000 Michigan State fans chanting and kind of echoing through the building. And it just seemed like, man, they had it. They were right there. Like, they were on the level of Michigan State, right? They climbed all the way up, and now it was back to this huge gap between the two programs.
And even 2 weeks earlier, they had taken Michigan State to overtime in East Lansing, and that was probably one of the worst home losses that I can remember. I mean, that was not even competitive, and just a beat down in front of your rival like that. That's a pretty obvious low point. I mean, that whole season is just kind of rock bottom for that second kind of generation of Beilein era. And I wrote in we were doing like our all Beilein position team on Hoops, and I was talking about Spike Albrecht in that year. I feel like he really basically gave his entire body and career.
Oh my God, that team would have gone 10 and 27 that year or something.
And he was playing with a hip injury and everything, and ended up having to go and get surgery from that. And just thinking back to that year, and they really played hard that whole down the stretch there. They had all those crazy overtime games, like the one they couldn't inbound the ball at Illinois. Like, that was just all sorts of crazy things.
Right. I'm looking at the box score of that overtime game at Michigan State. Max Bielfeldt played 33 minutes off the bench that night. Andrew Dockage played 16 minutes off the bench.
I think they lost 2-0 in overtime that year. They lost 10-0 in overtime to Michigan State, and I think Illinois was the same thing. I think so. Illinois was 14-2 in overtime. So it was this like team that just didn't have the talent and managed to barely play these teams to overtime, just give everything they have, and then just get run off the court in overtime every time. It was brutal.
The all-time Spike performance, the second all-time Spike performance was that year when they beat Ohio State at home. They beat D'Angelo Russell's Ohio State team at Chrysler with Spike Albrecht like crossing dudes over. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. And Spike could barely walk after these teams that year.
Right.
Like, it was just crazy.
Right.
And then he was never really the same as a player again after that year.
Yep.
So that's
a good one.
I feel bad for Spike after that year. Like, that's the year I'll always remember Spike for, just because of kind of what he gave. But it was just sort of the most depressing year to be remembered by. Biggest. We'll skip. We'll do biggest what if, because I know you talk about this one all the time.
What are you talking about? We're not doing the upsets?
We can. All right, we'll do biggest upsets. I missed that.
Knock them out.
All right.
What's your biggest upset? Who gives a shit if the podcast is an hour and a half or 2 hours? What's the difference?
What's your biggest upset?
Biggest upset was, I don't know if this is a really good one, but this is the best I could come up with in terms of my coverage span. The 2018 team, I'm sorry, going into the Big Ten tournament in New York and beating Michigan State and Purdue in back-to-back days. Like, maybe this should have been like most impressive or something like that, but I just feel like the odds of winning those two games in back-to-back days for a team that was like pretty good, but I feel like going into the Big Ten tournament that year, if I remember correctly, like, most people probably would have taken Michigan State or Purdue in those. No, I don't remember.
I mean, Michigan had won in East Lansing that year already.
Yeah.
So I don't know that was a huge upset. Oh, you're talking 2017. Sorry, let me go back. Hadn't Michigan...
No, 2018.
You're talking 2018?
Beating Purdue and Michigan State back-to-back days.
But didn't Michigan beat both of those teams in the regular season?
Well, they lost to Purdue in that game.
They lost to Purdue.
Oh, they got swept by Purdue.
Yeah, so they lost both of those Purdue games close, right?
Yeah.
And then they beat Michigan State the only time they played. So it was certainly the most impressive stretch. I wouldn't go biggest upset.
Wow, I just couldn't come up with a better.
I threw it back for mine, and I went with UCLA in 2008 and that was really the first game that kind of gave Michigan any belief that they could be good. I don't know that UCLA team was really good, but they won at the Garden. Beat Drew Holiday, I think, on that UCLA team, and that at the time UCLA was top 5. Michigan was kind of coming off a 20 loss season, nothing expected. Big backdoor dunk for Deshaun Sims that kind of got the whole thing going.
I got one. I'm changing my answer, but you can finish your thought.
No, so that one's up there, and then obviously again, I didn't want to talk about too much about the game at Michigan State in 2011. The thing I'll point out about that is that Michigan State team wasn't really great. So I don't know, like it was a big upset because Michigan had lost 6 in a row, but Michigan State, that was probably the worst they've been in the last decade also that year.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want my new answer? Ignore my other one. This is way better. March 11th, 2016. Do you know what it is?
I don't.
Michigan 72, Indiana 69. Cam Chapman hits a corner three-pointer to beat a... did they win the Big Ten that year?
Indiana?
They went 15-3. They had to have.
Yeah.
So that's the Yogi Ferrell Indiana team that was pretty damn good. Finished the regular season 25-6 and 15-3 in the league. Went on to beat Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. Michigan, basically bound for the NIT at that point, goes and pulls it out of its ass. Yogi Ferrell scored 14 points in that game. Derek Walton scored 2 points in that game, and Michigan won. Obviously, everyone remembers the Cam Chapman three-pointer that he took by accident because it wouldn't have been passed to him. But
didn't Derek say after the game he thought it was someone else?
I think he said he thought that it was Muhammad or something.
Yeah.
And he passed it to Cam. Cam hits it in the corner. I was unfortunately stuck in Indianapolis for another night while I needed my wisdom teeth out and was in excruciating pain. And I had to sit in front of the Indiana band for that game, and I thought I was going to kill myself. But, yeah, one of the all-timers.
Second to last shot Cam Chapman made at Michigan.
There you go. I mean,
that was a good one.
What do you think the line was on that game? They had to have been 8-point underdogs, right? Minimum?
I would think, yeah.
There you go.
Got to be something like that. That's a good one. I didn't even think of that. All right, biggest what if.
Biggest what if. You want to go first?
You can go first. This is the one you always talk about.
Yeah.
You were all in. You were convinced about this team.
Oh, I thought I was convinced I might get a book deal, but we're going back to the playing rec season, or no, the following season.
No,
that's right. I'm sorry, 2017.
It's the playing season.
The playing season. Michigan wins the Big Ten tournament on a carpet ride, right? Illinois, Purdue, Minnesota, Wisconsin, 4 straight wins. They go ripping and tearing into the NCAA tournament as a 7 seed. Beat Oklahoma State. Beat Louisville in a game that were people picking them to lose that game? I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, there was a 7-2.
Yeah, right.
Upset.
Right. That was the rematch of the national championship game. They win that game. They go to the Sweet 16 to play Oregon, who I think a lot of people had, Michigan had the mojo at that point. And we're picking them to win that game and then maybe lose to Kansas, right? Because the game was in Kansas City. Oregon plays a great game, but what if Derek Walton's three-pointer from the wing that was right on line, was it short? Hit the front end of the...
I was sitting so far away, I could hardly even tell you what happened in that game.
I was sitting right at half court. And
I was floating in the rafters.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I was right on line with it, and from where I was sitting, it looked good. And the fact that Derek Walton had made everything for 3 weeks straight. And it looked like there was no chance he was missing that shot when it left his hand. And it didn't go in.
But yeah, Brendan becomes convinced, he really sells himself on these narratives. And he's about early March, one team he's convinced that he's covering is going to the Final Four.
Sure. And
this was Michigan that year. And he was dead set on it. He probably had everything ready to go. But
I got called by a book publisher that was like, all right, if they go to the Final Four, this is the plane crash story, the Beilein story, all this stuff. I was ready to go. And people always ask, like, do you root for the teams? No. Do I root for myself and my story? Yes. So this thing was looked like a Hollywood screenplay in the works. And the reason I say it's such a what if is because Kansas, if you remember, in the Elite Eight game, which everyone just assumed they were going to beat the piss out of whoever they played, Kansas was horrific in that game. It was basically the Josh Jackson era at Kansas, or season summed up in one night. They were just god awful, totally played below expectations, lost in front of a home crowd, and I think Michigan would have beat Kansas that night and gone to another Final Four.
That Oregon team was pretty.
They were loaded. They were bad dudes.
Loaded. They were tough, and then Tyler Dorsey just was playing out of his mind just about as much as Derek Walton was that weekend. So that's a good what if. I went a little different. I said my two biggest what ifs are kind of health/suspension related. I would have loved to see basically a full season of either Mitch McGary at Michigan or Karis LeVert, like a healthy season as the focal point. I think that really kind of that down era of Michigan basketball.
What if Mitch didn't fail the drug test?
Yeah, what if Mitch doesn't fail that drug test, comes back? What if Karis LeVert doesn't get hurt twice? I think those two guys are just sort of an empty chapter there that could have been something more.
What year did they win the national championship with a full tilt healthy Mitch McGary?
See, that's what I don't know because they became something so different in that season. I don't know if you would have ever found what you wanted, but what if he comes back healthy when you've already got that? Then maybe, right? I don't know. They were
if they just sat him
for the first 4 months of the year, and then he came back and
comes back mid-January,
rocking and rolling in January and February, and maybe. They were still a shot away from almost the Final Four, right? So it's not that crazy to look back on.
No, that's a really good one. That's a really good one because they lose to Kentucky, and Michigan would have played Wisconsin in the Final Four,
who Michigan had
already beaten,
conquered more than any other year that year. Yeah,
right. Man, okay, that's a good one. Best season.
This I don't know. These are kind of easy. What do you have?
I put 2017-18. I'm trying to remember my logic for it.
Because they went to the Final Four and you covered it. That was the only team that went. I mean, if you're only going off what you covered.
That year definitely I think the second Final Four, not validating Beilein, but I don't know. I think it just brought his tenure to a different place.
I think
they also got an extremely fortunate draw, but whatever.
Yeah, I think the 2013 team had a better regular season, had a better NCAA tournament, and was the better team overall. I don't think that is that controversial, but I also think that I would look at a couple other years to point out also. Like the 2014, I think was probably the best regular season that Beilein ever had, at least in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. And the 2012, I think, might be Beilein's best coaching job because that team had no business winning as many games as it did in the Big Ten season. But obviously it comes with the footnote of probably the worst NCAA tournament coaching job. So
yeah. But even if you go back to the beginning of 17-18, I mean, there was no one would have predicted that team was going to the Final Four, right? They lost to a pretty mediocre LSU team. Then they get waxed at North Carolina. And then they had that awful loss at Ohio State when they were up and then just came undone.
What? Yeah, I mean, they were terrible in November and December.
Yeah.
I guess, so they made the Final Four. The teams they beat to make the Final Four that year just...
I agree.
You'll look back on it 20 years from now and you'll be like, how the hell did Michigan play Montana, Houston, Texas A&M, Florida State, and Loyola Chicago and get to the national championship?
Yeah, the best team it played... And before the national championship game was in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Houston was the best team it played that year in that year's NCAA tournament until they played Villanova. Yeah,
so I just give the edge to the 2013 team because they're NCAA tournament draw was a little more difficult, and I just think they had more talent overall.
Yeah. All right, worst season I put 2014-15. Obviously, that's the only losing season I covered under Beilein here, and it was just it was just such a slog of a year. And the thing is, like, there's no, I don't know, you're not really faulting coaching or the players. I mean, it was circumstances, but up until NJIT EMU, LeVert was playing, Walton was playing. Like, that team, there was something flawed about that team before it even came to kind of the roster coming undone.
Yeah, those losses, they were healthy in those games. Yeah. There were serious issues with that team. I think they were feeling themselves a little too much after they beat up on some Italian local squads over there, and that they're not in the international trip.
You also have to remember, after the EMU game, so they lose that game, then they go to Arizona and just got run. I mean, like, the game was over 5 minutes into it, and then they come home and just got bullied by SMU. I mean, it was
for the second year in a row, right?
Yeah, that was in that era when Xavier and SMU just completely punked those Michigan teams early in the non-conference, and then and that all really led up to the blue collar, white collar.
Remember all that? Arizona team was nasty too, though.
Yeah,
McConnell, Stanley Johnson, Rondé Hollis Jefferson. They punked Michigan. Rondé Hollis Jefferson punked Karis LeVert in that game. Now they play together in Brooklyn, right?
Oh,
or they did.
Michigan had one player in double figures at Arizona.
That was an underrated venue out there. Like, we can make fun of UCLA for being kind of lame West Coast basketball fans, but Arizona fans brought it. That was a pretty crazy
that place was
atmosphere
cooking
there.
Yeah, they got a great.
They had a DJ and all sorts of stuff going on. I think.
Did you stay at that Marriott resort? Were you?
No, I did not. I wasn't big balling like you.
That was great. But go ahead. Sorry.
I think that the 2011 season's worse than 2015 because there wasn't really a baked-in injury excuse. It was just the 2010 team, 2009-2010 team. That team had a losing record with really no reason they should have had a losing record, and they did not play hard through the end of the year like that 2015 team did. They just weren't a functional team. I would go with that as kind of the most disappointing season. So what else do we have here? We already talked about the last one, so we can delete this. We're going to talk about, I guess we had craziest endings. I think this is funny because I find it far more interesting to remember games that Michigan lost dramatically than games they won. It's funny, we made this list and we didn't even have the Jordan Poole shot on it at first, but what is your craziest ending to a Michigan game that you covered?
Did you just say Jordan Poole?
I threw it out there. I stole your thunder.
You just took my answer. Yeah, man, the Jordan Poole shot against Houston, it's an all-timer. I think it'll live on as one of the kind of lasting March memories for Michigan basketball, 30 years from now. I mean, that shot was just incredible. They probably didn't have much of a right to win that game, but the best part of it is the little conversation. Who was that dude? Man bun.
Rob Gray.
Thank you. Rob Gray walking past Jordan Poole and saying, "Hey, Poole, where are you from?" And Poole saying Milwaukee. And Rob Gray responding, "Well, you're about to go back to Milwaukee," and then Poole coming and hitting that shot, which it was great.
Better shot, Jordan Poole or Trey Burke?
Trey Burke. To put him in the Final Four against an iconic program like Kansas, no doubt about it.
It was not. It was to put him in the Elite Eight.
Oh, sorry, Elite Eight. Okay.
I guess we didn't talk about that Kansas game a bit. I think did we do biggest comebacks? We never did biggest comebacks, but that Kansas game, if you look back on it, is really the most improbable game ever kind of along the way. I mean, the score was, I think, 72-62 inside of 5 minutes, and somehow Michigan came all the way. But there's really no reason Michigan had to win that game, and I don't know how it really. I had I changed my flight halfway through the second half of that game. It was over, right? It was 10-point game. basically a road game in Texas there with Kansas fans, and it just all happened so quick as far as what's going on here. Oh, wait, this isn't really going to happen. And then he hits that shot, and it's just sort of disbelief, and then Michigan just pulls away in overtime. I mean, Kansas missed a bunch of free throws. All this stuff happened, but just one of the craziest games I can remember, without a doubt. And really, that season will be remembered completely differently if Michigan just lost in the Sweet 16 there, right? I mean, that would be kind of looked at as a disappointing season where you get to preseason number 1, you blow the regular season on a missed tip-in at home, you just bow out in the Sweet 16, like sort of like the perfect disappointment season. But that was really just, I don't know how that happened, right? Like, minimum win probability, 1.2% on Ken Palm. It was 72-62,
Wow.
2:33 left. So in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, they came back. Game had it all. Had a little trash talk going with Jeff Withey calling Mitch McGarry small. Had Elijah Johnson punching Mitch McGarry in the nuts. And then Michigan won. You had the buzzer beater. McGarry went crazy. It's just a bizarre game.
That's pretty good. And like you wonder if they don't go to the Final Four that year, when things kind of went sideways a couple years later, how much Beilein, how much yarn would he have to hold on with? Because when things got rocky, at least you have that Final Four to lean on. If that wasn't there, yikes, things could have gone a little differently. Is that it?
I think. I mean, we can talk about. I
want to hear your favorite Beilein isms.
My favorite Beilein isms.
He
I feel
feel
like I've
for
almost
11
been
years.
brainwashed by like how Beilein thinks about basketball.
Yeah.
So like, I start to watch a basketball game thinking like, what would Beilein do in these situations? So
Sure.
It's going to be interesting, kind of going forward. It's going to just change my viewpoint a little bit here. But what's your favorite Beileinism?
I mean, I'm trying to think of them off the whole you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Remember that one? And
Emotionally drunk is an all-timer.
Emotionally drunk's a great one. We talk about
Tim Hardaway was one of the biggest emotional drinkers on the team, I'd say.
When he talks about players wearing
that.
tuxedos. That's a good one. What's the pebble in your shoe? That whole thing. I don't know. I'm sure people can reply on Twitter with theirs. I'm sure we're missing a ton of them. But
every team that they ever played.
Great team ever. Just
greatest
an amazing
team we've
team.
seen.
Who was the dude
So
he compared
well
to Charles Barkley? Who was like from a D2 team or something?
Oh, we didn't talk about that game, the Hillsdale game. Oh, what's his name? That was an all-timer too. What? I should know his name. I was talking about him recently.
Of
some
course
reason.
you were. That's normal.
Like, I need to find it. What year was that? It must have been 2011. Concordia. Oh, it's not on Ken Palm. He doesn't have the rosters. Come on, Ken. It's like Rocco Holmes or something.
Rocco sounds right.
Rocco Holmes. He went crazy against Michigan. Tore up Ricky Doyle. That was another great one. That might have been before Ricky Doyle. That was Jordan Morgan. But
what was your favorite Beilein interaction?
Favorite Beilein interaction? I don't even know. Well, you probably have a better story for this one.
Well, my first one was when I show up at his office and he asked me where I went to college. I say St. Joseph's University. He's like, "Oh man, so Philadelphia. Where'd you go to high school?" I say St. Joseph's Prep. Both are Jesuit schools. He loses his mind because he loves the Jesuits more than anything in the world, maybe other than his family. So Beilein then proceeds to give me a blow-by-blow scouting report for all of the parishes in Ann Arbor and what priests give the best homilies. And, I forget, one guy goes, man, his homilies, he gets to the point and he keeps it to a tight 8 minutes. And he's like breaking it down the way he would a game. I'm sitting there listening, and yes, John, that sounds great, and blah blah. I'm not a particularly religious person, but that's all good. And so we broke down the parishes of Ann Arbor in a very Beilein way. I'm trying to think. I mean, Beilein's an interesting guy. We obviously got to know each other very well over the years. Kind of the lasting picture I would have would be when I went back to the team hotel after they beat Florida State, and that was kind of his. I think that he enjoyed the second Final Four more than he did the first one, because the first one he was so wound up from all the stories I've heard and all that, and the second one, whether it was the plane, whether it was being a grandfather, whatever it was, he was just kind of a different guy the last couple years, and I think he let himself enjoy that one a little differently, and we kind of had a talk that night back at the team hotel that I'll probably keep between the two of us, but it was he was just a guy who I think was really at peace with kind of where he was in his life. His demeanor just kind of on those NCAA tournament runs just completely shifted over the course of a decade that he was in charge, right? I mean, no doubt. And it was just to see how he kind of held court in the 2018 Final Four compared to the 2013 where he was like the new guy, right? Like, right. And it's a lot. Like, there's all this media stuff, and you could tell he just hated all of it. That year they were busting Trey Burke around everywhere to go get Player of the Year awards at like every stop. Like, there's so many Player of the Year awards. It's ludicrous. But and he was just, I think, still kind of had an attitude that he didn't want to deal with the media, whereas like later on he kind of learned that it's just part of the process. Definitely grew into that, I would say. So, good example. Are we crediting you with that development? Good example. What was that? Are we crediting you with that development? You just wrote enough profiles of him? Not in the least bit. But I to underline that point, I don't know if I've said this, but so when I wrote that big freaking thing on him in 14, was that? I think 14 or 15, I don't know. But I was still at M Live, and we wanted to profile his early years from being a kid up in Burt, New York, to basically, I wanted to write from childhood to the end of his Richmond era, because there's basically all the years that he wasn't famous. He went to West Virginia, his profile changed, obviously. But before that, I kind of wanted to write a portrait of those years. And so I tell Michigan that I'm doing this. Beilein is relayed back to me, has zero interest in partaking in any of this whatsoever. But if I talk to people and they ask him, that he would agree to, they kind of give the okay, whatever. So I proceed to go to Syracuse and Buffalo, and then I go down to Wheeling, West Virginia, where he went to college, and cobble together all this stuff. I interviewed well over 30 people, blah, blah, blah. And I get back, so I have all of this shit. And now I go back to Michigan, and I say, listen, I've talked to all these people. I've talked to his family. Will John sit down with me for an interview? And Tom Wyrot comes back, and Tom, God bless him, is he feels terrible with what he's about to tell me, but he goes, John will give you a half hour. He gave me a half an hour sit down for this story, which is just crazy in hindsight, given you basically spent your whole summer trekking around upstate New York. But it goes to who he was at that time, right? Mm-hmm. This was not definitely who he was. If I had done that 4 years later, he would have, it would have been a completely different thing, obviously. But yeah, and then they didn't want to make Kathleen available, and I'm like, you gotta let me talk to Kathleen. So they agreed that Kathleen would talk to me. I asked if I could go to the house, and they agreed that Kathleen would talk to me for a half an hour in the basketball office, and that was it. So, but I've gotten to know the family really well, from John's kids to Kathleen and some extended family and all that. It's just good people all the way across the line. So it was, it was a great 6 or 7 years, whatever, covering the program under him, and I'm sure the same for you for all 11, which is pretty wild. Yeah. No, on to a new chapter. And now that's a wrap. He will not be mentioned. We're done. But it does speak to the fact that I think we've said this before on the pod, that everything Juwan Howard does cannot be pulled through the lens of the way Beilein did it.
Yes, I agree with that. I also think Juwan Howard is in a position to leverage some of what and how Beilein did things to his advantage, right? Like you look at season tickets are sold out.
Sure.
That's obviously because of Juwan Howard excitement, but also the fact that Michigan won 63 games over the last 2 years, and
if it were a trash heap, if like Juwan Howard were just inheriting garbage,
exactly,
no one would care that it was Juwan Howard. Like there was no way that it would be a sold out season ticket allotment. No chance.
So I just think it's a really interesting opportunity for Juwan to kind of leverage some parts of that and maybe like supercharge, build off of that how he wants. It's a great starting point, right? It'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
But I agree that like you can't say, well, Beilein did X, Y, and Z. Why does he do A, B, and C? But the potential best outcome might be doing A, Y, and C.
Right.
Mix it up. Take
but
a little
I'll
bit.
be curious to see how he's covered. Like, you know, if he loses to whatever team, and it'll be like, oh, Beilein had won his last 6 against this team, and stuff like that. Like, you know, that'll get tired real quick, and I would think it would kind of be an injustice to a guy trying to make his own way. So we'll see how it goes. But the hard
Many
part
more
will
pots
be
to talk about that.
The hard part will be, you know, if it doesn't go well, it'll just be everyone's instinct to everything will be compared to Beilein. So. We'll see. It will be interesting, but hour 40 minutes, not too bad.
Oh, not too bad. People are in for a long hoops pod in September.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll be curious to see what some people's answers were to some of our categories, or any protests, or any.
We probably missed some things.
Undoubtedly. So hit us on Twitter if you want to join into the conversation. Just make sure to tag Dylan and I. He's at Hoops. I'm at BF Quinn. So that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for hanging in. We'll be back next week. We're going to kind of start jumping into a bunch of Big Ten preview stuff, and we'll have a Michigan State-centric episode coming up soon. So follow along, rate, review, share with your friends, subscribe to Hoops, subscribe to The Athletic, and be sure to tip your bartenders and your servers.